I want to welcome everybody back to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights to help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have an awesome guest with us. His name is Rubén Gómez. He's a visionary entrepreneur, coach, and founder of the Seasonal Movement, a groundbreaking approach to living in harmony with nature's rhythms, specifically how to leverage the seasonal patterns to achieve more with less effort. His mission is simple yet profound to help individuals break free from yearly cycles of burnout and misalignment and unlock sustainable energy year round for peak performance, productivity, well being, and life fulfillment. Ruben's mission is to inspire a global shift towards seasonal harmony, realigning how we live, how we work, and thrive in today's fast paced world without ignoring the challenges and opportunities the seasons provide. His impact goes beyond teaching practical tools. He's creating a ripple effect that elevates collective consciousness and redefines what success means for us. Ruben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. And wow, the vision of your podcast, it couldn't be any better place for me to be right now, as my story really reflects, going through the dark times and coming out of it on the other side.
Yeah, I was really excited to meet you last week when we talked because seasonal effectiveness disorder, or SAD as it's abbreviated, is not something that's very well talked about or very well researched and understood. And I think it's something that definitely impacts people across the country. I can share really briefly where I live in Washington State in the PNW. I hear people all the time complain about the weather and how it impacts them and affects them. And I'm not somebody who's very affected by those things, but I hear about it a lot, and I've been really curious to learn more about what seasonal effectiveness disorder is. And so I'm really excited to have you on the show today to explain to my listeners what that actually is and what that means and how that's impacted you in your experience.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, Chris. So, first of all, seasonal affective disorder is a subset of what most people know as the winter blues. Even if you don't feel that you have an issue, it's very common for people to say, "Oh yeah, I know what the winter blues are. I feel them." We feel the difference as seasons change, and the seasonal affective disorder is the recognition that the environment and specifically the seasons have a role to play in our well-being. It's not just the winter. Seasonal affective disorder actually encompasses any season. Some people will feel very up in the springtime. That's actually when suicide rates go up the roof, sadly. And then might feel burnout in the summer because they go nonstop. That is because a neurochemical chemistry happening within our brain, within our bodies, cortisol's rising, serotonin rising. There is a chemistry happening on the background inside of us that we don't realize, and it's constantly changing throughout the year. Our metabolism adapts, or energy levels, or moods is all in relation with what's happening on the environment. And my journey is one of transformation from being in that place. I have a story about it, but what I want us to keep in understanding is this is all backed by science. Epigenetics is the new thing within the genetic realm of scientific discovery. It is something that has been going for about 2 decades now, but is still in very infant stages. And epi means above, and gene obviously is the gene, right? So epic is above the gene. What happens above the gene? Because we are born with genes. And before this discovery, most scientific areas will think that, hey, you're doomed. Like you're born the way you're born, and your life is going to be the way it's supposed to be. But interestingly, there has been a lot of experimentation and research happening, and they have put twins. And that's just, there's a lot of examples. But if you have two twins, they essentially have a very similar genetic code within them. They're identical, and they turn out to be very different people. So what is that changes us as we grow? Well, that is the environment. Now, what is the environment? The environment encompasses the exterior environment, and you can, look into the seasons as the best example. Also, the interior environment where you live. Do you have any windows? Do you have any views? Nature, exercise, sleep, behaviors that you do every single day, nutrition, what you consume throughout the day, those all change throughout the seasons. That's what is so interesting. Another one will be social dynamics. They change with the seasons. That's where my fascination came in place when I realized, wow, this that I'm experiencing is universal and there is power into it. So I started looking into it and I realized, why is this not as known as other things, right? That we can take for granted that science has proof. And the reality is that, again, seasonal affective disorder and understanding how the seasons affect us, it really throws things off. It's relatively complicated because every season is different. And most research, most experiments, when they take groups and they put them into testing, they don't really specify what season of the year that experiment was being taking place. They don't really specify the location of that experiment. Some of them do, but it's not like the research stars. This experiment was taken on this location during this time of the year. Most of them just kind of ignore that. And what I have come to the realization is that the same person living in a different season, in a different location, will react very differently based on that. So it's super interesting to really start paying attention to that in the way that we feel, we think, and behave, because it truly changes season after season.
I think that's really powerful that you said that because I myself have noticed in the wintertime, you brought this up when we first talked. In the wintertime, we don't get as much daylight. It's a very, very short window of light in our day. And so I remember you talking about how in the wintertime we go to bed at, 9 or 10 o'clock at night and it's dark out, very dark out. But in the summertime, we've got so much more light. And so when we do go to bed, we usually end up going to bed a little bit later because the light stays there longer. And so there's always this shift in our environment, and we shift subconsciously with that, almost like it's biologically in tune with us, if I understood you right.
Yeah, it is. So the science of chronobiology is the discipline that studies the environment in our genes. It happens at an unconscious level. There are part of the brains that activate. And right now, circadian rhythms is very popular, the effect of the lighting in our genetics. It activates certain hormones and neurotransmitters depending of the light. And honestly, it's just the absence of light that activates them, but we go through a pattern. Like we start segregating and creating cortisol in the morning, and it starts just kind of going down a little bit as we go throughout the day. And once it gets dark, it's supposed to go away so that we are not alert anymore, so that we feel rested and we feel tired and we want to go to sleep. But again, there is all sorts of environmental disturbances going on right now, like the lighting, the LEDs, the phones, the computers. Every single artifact that is emitting a bright light is full of blue light, which is essentially what we experience during the middle of the day, just around noon, not noontime, but perhaps around the meridian, when the sun is the strongest, an hour and a half before or after. So that sends mixed signals to our brain. Now, what we want to understand is that this has been scientifically proven, scientifically studied, and that's where the discipline of circadian rhythms, which is a subset of chronobiology, comes in place. And that gives us the tools to basically understand, okay, it's winter time. What am I doing wrong this time of the year that is throwing me off? If our natural rhythms in the winter will be to go to sleep early, how come there is people that can't go to sleep till late? They truly have to look into their behaviors and those habits. And that will start giving you signals, because usually the issue is not that they're going to sleep late. It's just that they're doing something before going to sleep that is preventing them to be in their natural flow and their natural rhythm. So to answer your questions, yes, we have internal mechanisms. We have natural rhythms within our brain and our body that are completely in sync with nature. Now it's up to us to honor that, to understand them, so that we don't feel disturbed, so that we are not out of sync. And the benefit of doing that, just that one area that I'm talking about, the chronobiology, is that we will feel better. We will think clearly. We will have the right amount of energy for that specific season. Again, energy throughout the seasons is supposed to vary a little bit. Like, again, we go to sleep a little early in the winter, we go to sleep a little later in the summer. Well, are you living with the same routine all year round? That's truly the question. And that's where we start becoming aware. We can forget about this, the science and all the terminology behind it. But if we understand and we very easily admit that, hey, it gets dark very early in the winter, it's still bright very late. Are we adjusting to those changes? That's where the seasons come in place. It allows us to segment the year. It allows us to recognize the patterns in what? In every single behavior that I mentioned earlier. Social dynamics shift dramatically season after season. The lighting environment, the temperature, the way that we feel the energy to go and exercise, the way that, again, the timing of our sleep. So what we want to do is be aware of them and create seasonal routines that are in line in that specific moment in time so that we can thrive, so that we can feel better, so that we can avoid going into seasonal affective disorder, which is where my story starts. It was the awareness of, wow, this is important. Maybe I should look into it because it's what's throwing me off.
So I'm really glad you brought that up because something that I found fascinating is I've lived in the US my whole life and I've never traveled abroad, but you let me know that you grew up in Venezuela. You lived down there. And so I wanted to ask you about that because I'm curious if there's more sunlight down in Venezuela, if it's a whole different climate, a whole different four seasons down there, if you will, compared to where you live now, if I remember right, in Nebraska. If I'm,
Correct. I moved to Omaha, Nebraska when I was 21 years old. I'm currently 36 as we're filming. And I experienced a one season life for my first 21 years in life. I experienced the summer. I will travel, but we usually travel to places that have nice weather. We don't go to vacation to the Midwest in the middle of the winter. It's not something you do. There's a reason for that. And then when I moved to the Midwest, I was excited for the first 5 years. I was a student playing baseball, got married, but over time, something was off. Like, I'm very driven. I have plans, I have goals, but somehow I'm just like getting stuck. And I remember this winter time, it was 2015. I'm still an entrepreneur. All my life I've been an entrepreneur, and I would wake up early, but I wouldn't get out of bed. That's not normal. Like, it's still 9 a.m. I'm still in bed and I'm just like overthinking. And I will sit in the computer, do a little bit of work. 2, 3 hours later, I'm just can't contain my anxiety and my confusion and my basically I'm like either grieving or I'm like anxious about something. I'm worried and I stop working. Like, I spent all afternoon just sitting in the couch, maybe rearranging furniture. I can still see it like it was yesterday. This is a new house we just moved into. My wife will come back at night, we'll have dinner, and that movie will repeat itself. That movie just kept playing for 2 weeks until I tell my wife, this is what's happening. Like, I don't know what I'm feeling. And I think that's what I'm hearing in this podcast because this is about grief, seasonal affective disorder, the winter blues, even summer mania, like those up and downs. That's grieving, man. That's grieving inside. Like, it is pressure, is associated with depression, is associated with anxiety, confusion, all those feelings. And I tell her, this is what I'm feeling. I don't understand this. She looks at me and she say, oh, sweetie, you have the winter blues. You have them every winter. And that got me out of whack. I'm like, what is the winter blues? What is your problem? I'm okay. I got defensive. I didn't understood anything about the environment having an impact in the way that humans feel, humans think, humans behave. And it's not like I had a major shift immediately, but that opened the door so that in the next few years, I started to realize, wow, the environment has a major role in my life. Let me study this. I need to figure this out because if not, I'm not going to be able to achieve what I want to achieve. Like, it's my kryptonite every winter. And as the story progresses, I thought at the beginning that I was working in the winter project. I thought the winter was the enemy. I have to conquer the winter. But as I kept progressing through a series of events, through a lot of personal growth and development, I realized, wow, the reason that I experienced these very low times during the winter is because I also experienced these very high points in the spring and the summer. And as I look at my year, I realize this is a roller coaster. I'm just going up and down, up and down, up and down. I didn't realize that it wasn't just in a season, it was all year round. So, going back to the fact that I'm from Venezuela, I grew up in the sun. I grew up playing baseball pretty much every other day. And the sun has a big effect in my energy levels. It truly gives me energy. It changes my mood. It keeps me going. I have more energy. But what is interesting is that in the Midwest, the summer is a day and a half longer than the winter. Have you think about
Interesting.
that? As far as daylight, the summer has over 6 more hours than the normal day in the winter. And I do that by looking at a table. I create a table and I follow the light patterns throughout the year. I just basically go on a website and check, when is the sunrise, when is the sunset, what is the length of the day. And you can do that where you live and you can notice, oh, where I live, it might be 4 hours difference. In my case, it's 6 hours difference. And the norther or souther you go, the bigger that difference becomes. So, in a way, the seasonal change is more important from a lighting perspective than anything else, than even the weather. But we can't just stop there. We have to also recognize what you see, what you hear, what you feel, the wind. Everything changes. Everything completely flips upside down. And by knowing that the environment is the number one influence in the way that you're going to turn out in life, in the way that you're going to develop, in the way that you are going to feel, think, and behave, then we have to start paying more attention to it. We need to start recognizing there is a non-conscious process happening here that is important to understand. And
Yeah.
that's what we bring into our model, into understanding. Hey, let's help you understand how the weather changes around you so that we can come up with conscious decisions. And so that we can understand as well the energy of every single season and how to navigate that. You can use these for any area of your life. You can use these for, you know, personal growth. You can use these for improving your physique. You can use these for grieving. I have a very interesting approach about grieving. When you're going through tough times, you have to really have a seasonal understanding of what's happening. And I would love to share that.
Well, I'm glad you're here today because that's exactly what I'd love for you to share. I think that something I want to hit on too that you just said, by the way, is that there's a lot of auto processes going on in our body, and something I've learned through my own coaching journey is that 95% of our body runs automated. I mean, a lot of people don't think about this, but you think about what word you're going to say before you even say it. It happens quick. You're not thinking about how many breaths you're taking right now. You're not controlling how fast your heart beats, how fast your blood through moves your body, how much, me moving my hand just now. I didn't think about that consciously. It just happened. So we have so much automation going on in our body that's self-regulated that we don't think about as we're interacting and engaging. So I was really glad you brought that up. When I lived on the East Coast, which is very different from the PNW where I'm at, we had actual 4 seasons. And so when you were headed into fall and into winter, you would see trees start to die. You'd start to see the ground change color. You would start to see not so much sunlight. And when winter hit, it was very, very dark during the night and very bright during the day. And then when it snowed, it was the same thing. There was a change constant. And when spring rolled around, birds were hatching constantly, all different
Yeah.
birds. There was leaves coming back to life. The sun stays out longer. The air smells different. The summers out there had lots of moisture. In the wintertime, it was dry air. So there's all these changes going on seasonally around people. And I would notice these patterns because there were people that would just absolutely complain during winter every single day. They would just absolutely couldn't stand it. And then when summer rolled around, they would like it for a degree, but then they would complain about the humidity or how hot it got. And so I always noticed that weather plays a big role for people in their ability to just enjoy themselves throughout the year.
So
So.
before we go in the grieving process, I want to nail that in the head because I completely agree. 95% of our thoughts are non-conscious thoughts, and that's better explained by the iceberg behavioral model, which basically let us know, hey, the tip of the iceberg is the smallest part, and that's what you can see. That's what you're consciously thinking about. The rest 95% is happening on the background, and all those details that you mentioned, all those details about the color changing in the trees in the fall, the humidity, the smells, the wind, the direction, the intensity of the sun, all that, our brain is capturing that. Our brain is a survival mechanism. We have survived over millennials because our brain is here to help us survive. Our brain is not here to help us thrive. He wants to survive. He wants to live for another day. So he hasn't really evolved to today's standard, to the fact that we have a grocery store down the street, and if we injure ourselves we can go to the clinic and we have cooling and air. He's still living like, hey, it's winter, it's not as safe out there. Let's just make you aware. Let's raise your cortisol levels a little bit so you are on alert. Whenever weather start changing, all those things that you mentioned, the changing on the wind patterns, the color, the visuals, the sounds, is telling our brain change is coming, so you better prepare for it. There is a preparation process for us to survive that had to happen millennials ago and is still with us. Since we don't recognize that little stress signal that we perceive happening in the fall time, and if we don't manage that sinks us into the hole. That starts creating those negative thought patterns. Those people that, oh, I
Mm.
hate the weather. Where is that coming from? Is it from that little cortisol that you're experiencing, or is just simply mindset? I think they're separate. Like it's just a mindset issue at that point. But there is some ways that we can honor that. Again, the first step is becoming aware that our brain is capturing signals. So I'm walking my kid to school today and I'm teaching him. I see the first sprouts of grass. And again, usually people will see that they won't even stop for a second and recognize that they understood what they're seeing. But I'm like, hey, kid, look at this. This is the first little piece of grass you're going to see this year. I got a bee to land on my hand last few days ago. First bee of the season, right? Like things are starting to shift. Paying attention to that. If you don't do it at a conscious level, your brain is still picking that up, and there is a neurochemical soup happening in your body, whether you realize it or not. Or metabolism changes now that we're turning into spring. We're shredding fat easier. So there is all sort of thinking that is happening on the background. And as that relates to grieving, if we have something that we're trying to heal, we should be aware of those non-conscious signals that we are receiving. Why? Those are neural paths in our brain that until you experience them, they're just kind of sleeping on the background. Like they are there, but they're not being activated. The environment is what
Mm.
activates those genes and activates those neuropaths in our brain. So when you see the first little bit of sprout coming out of the ground in the springtime, that is activating a neuropath in your brain. And you might be grieving because of loss. You might be grieving because of addiction. You might be grieving for something. What I want you to understand is that when you receive those signals from the environment, there's a memory on the background activating. That's something brand new that you have to deal with now. That is not something that you could have felt or thought about 2 months ago, perhaps when you were going through therapy, when you were going through coaching. That is something you have to deal in that moment. I hope that makes sense, because it's a whole cycle that we experience. Then it might be then you deal with it, you go through the spring, you go through that process. The summer again, it's constantly changing, it's constantly happening. It's not like one day summer, one day spring. It's a gradual movement. And again, let's say you get in the fall and you're grieving with the loss of a significant other, for example, and you see the signals. That is the time we used to go for a walk. You
Yeah,
see?
Yeah, that's the whole thing about these seasonal changes that I think people go through, and why it's hard is, we live in a society that's, I call it the urgency culture. We are so overstimulated constantly, and we've got, yeah, I'm trying to think of the word for it. Impulsiveness has been a huge thing in society, and so, as you were talking, I was sitting there reflecting about how you said, here's these first blades of grass. The season's changing. This is the first sign. Getting this bee to land on my hands, first sign of season. Uh, Most of us autopilot through life, and we don't actually take time to recognize those shifts. And I think that, when we live in that urgency culture and that just impulsiveness every day to jump to the next thing, jump to the next thing, jump to the next thing, it almost creates a monotony in that world. And on top of that monotony, we're not even understanding, the changes going on around us that are actually affecting us. And that's where there's a big disconnect between things. And that's probably why people say, oh, I hate summer, I hate winter. No, you don't hate it. You're just not paying attention, to those things that are happening. But once you do, like you said, it activates those genes, and then you can actually recognize those patterns. And from that point, you're able to take control and make those shifts that you need to feel more regulated throughout those season changes.
Absolutely. Whether the gene turns in our brain as a neuropath activating a new connection forming, or an existing connection, bridging again, activating, or whether those genes activate in our gut, in our metabolism, whether they usually start activating in our brain because it's the one that starts sending neurons through our body. But who picks the temperature? Is it your skin or is it the brain, right? Like, it's just a whole system working. It's a miracle that we are working at such a high capacity and we are not even recognizing it. We are on our phones. Most people are on their phones, not recognizing what's happening around them, and their world, even though we are connected, it just gets a lot smaller. Like, it's starting to be, that 5 by 2 inches, which is your phone, or that 5 by 3, right? Instead of everything that you see. But again, at an unconscious level, your brain is probably like, you're consciously are just looking at your phone, but unconsciously you have peripheral vision, and your brain is still picking up all the signals. Your brain is constantly looking for risk, for what can harm me right now. Like, your brain is constantly alert. So no wonder why your brain is signaling you, this is happening out there, you're not paying attention to it. Let me increase your cortisol level so you realize that something is out there. You better pay attention. There is a shift happening. There's an animal, whatever it is. There's something new we haven't seen in 3 months. And the cortisol level keeps rising, and people just don't recognize it, but then they don't know why I'm so anxious. That, like, and again, what are they going to hold to? That's part of the mindset. It's like, what are those things that you have to heal? That might be what you grab on. That's what you blame your depression on. I mean, it's not about blaming. I'm very caring about, this subject, by the way, but we have to bring consciousness to the non-conscious processes. And sometimes we have to explain it that way.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, off and on for the last few months, I've woken up in the morning and I feel fine for a second, and then I get this surge of anxiety. And I read up about it because I was going, I feel fine. I don't feel a threat. There's nothing threatening right now. I'm fine. I'm safe. Like, I tell myself that, but my body is reacting differently. And so, something that helped me kind of work through that is I started typing in, what causes anxiety in the morning. And like what you just said, your body spikes cortisol. It's to wake you up. It's to make you alert and aware, of your surroundings. And I think that, when you understand that, that anxiety goes away because you're paying attention to that subconscious process. And that's where, I've shared with people a lot. Anxiety is not something to be scared of. It's a warning sign from your body trying to communicate to you. So if you feel anxiety, there's some kind of threat going on, whether that's up here or it's out there. There's some kind of threat going on that your brain is saying, I'm not safe for some reason. I need to understand what that is. Because people have this idea of, why can't I be happy? Why can't happiness just come? And I go, this 2 million year old thing up here is not meant to make you happy. It's not meant to give you pleasure. It's not meant to make life easy. It's meant to keep you safe. It's meant to keep you to survive. It's meant to fend off threats. It's built that way. It's not meant to be happy. And so that's something we have to learn to work through and acknowledge within ourselves, not ignore it or say it's a problem, acknowledge it and understand it, so that we can actually process that emotion easier.
We're absolutely on the same page. You touch on two subjects when it comes down to cortisol and hormones through our body, and it's that there's a uniqueness to each one of us. We can agree that cortisol is supposed to rise in the morning to get us alert, but there is differences in the way that we are built, that some people experience a more dramatic cortisol rise early on, and some people have a build up. There is some people that the cortisol just absolutely drop in the afternoon. There is people that can sustain it for a little longer. So what that makes me signal here is that knowing oneself is extremely important. And we have the tools nowadays, so we can look at it from not stoic, but from a philosophical perspective, and take the time to know ourselves. Like, absolutely, that's necessary. And then there's also tools like epigenetic studies and genetic studies that can let you know, hey, you are this type of person genetically, you're built this way, and you're more prone towards this. Why? We want to know that, so that we can build our day around that at the times that we're the most productive, so that we can know, hey, it's beneficial for me to go exercise first thing in the morning. But again, another individual might say, hey, that's why I don't like working out in the morning. Like, actually, for me, it's a lot better to do in the afternoon. And that has something to do with our response to stress and how long it stays in our organism. Because stress is fine, but some people after workout stay with stress for a long time. So my point is, a lot of the advice is very well directed, but you have to learn about yourself so that you cannot take that advice for granted, and that you know how to apply it. Now, when the seasons come in place in this idea, is that seasons change that. Why? Because the environment changes. So we want to have knowledge about ourselves, and we want to have knowledge about the seasons and the pattern that we go throughout the year. That is the way that you can start predicting how you're going to feel, how much energy you're going to have throughout the year. Then, by predicting, since it's repeatable, the pattern of the weather is repeatable. If you're in the same location a year from now, you're most likely going to be experiencing something similar. Might be 2 or 3 weeks off, right? But it will be similar. So you can predict and you can plan around it. That's how we thrive. And again, the other subject that I wanted to just increase here is, when we're talking about cortisol, those cortisol jumps, like those increases that we experience, they change with the season. We're here to survive. When change happening around us, you're going to receive those signals. So again, get in sync with what's happening in the environment is a very valuable skill that we all should develop.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of very powerful things there, just about, regulating our cortisol level. And something I appreciate about your approach to things is you're not saying this is a one size fits all box for everybody, that there's just this one path for everybody that works. I love that you're discussing, just like the grief process, it's a very individual, personalized journey. There is not some magic pill you can take to figure that out. And I think that, like you said, really understanding your body, understanding how your system works, and using those things to your advantage, it really maximizes your potential of a person. I know that, when I lost my grandfather, it was in the middle of the summer. Sunlight was way out, and I felt like there was just all this time to process, all this time to feel. And it just felt like the days went on and on and on, and it was just this continual, perpetual process of things. Whereas, when I had losses in the fall, when it was darker out, it felt shorter. So I definitely noticed seasons affecting just how long I would sit with my thoughts during those times I went through hard stuff with grief. That would impact me about, oh, how long am I going to sit here today and think about this before I get tired and go to sleep? I also think, it's really, also about affecting your mood too. I mean, I think that's a big factor. I know people that you brought up earlier on this podcast living in Venezuela. You probably have way more sunshine than we do here in the States, like tenfold more sun. You don't have like in the PNW where I live, it's not uncommon to have 7 days of straight clouds. Like you don't even see the sun. It's just straight cloudy, rainy. And it gets very gloomy. Sometimes there's people that get very depressed. They literally are like, I can't see the sun. I'm gonna die. Like I just can't stand this. And then the sun pops out after that 7 day period, and you thought a miracle would have happened. I mean, you watch people go from this very deep depression to, woo, my life is good. I'm outside. Let's have fun. Let's do this. It's a big transition people make in such a short period of time.
That is part of the warning. If you want to take it, you touch on two subjects, and I'm going to start on that one. The other one is the fact that there is energies of the seasons. So through Chinese traditional medicine, we have energy. So I want to touch on that as we go through the grieving journey as well, because it has an influence in the way we feel. But as you mentioned, the normal up and downs, I mean, that's essentially what you describe. And I relate to it. I know many people that relate to it. I think that's like the new ounce that I want to make people aware of is that if you look at your energy graph throughout the year from January to December, what we want to achieve is something that looks like the yin yang. If you have the yin yang on a horizontal basis, that curve is horizontal, you're going to start low in the winter, right? It's less sun. It's like the energy of the winter is one of yin. It's basically contraction, it's darkness, it's introspection. But as we start moving into the spring, it start picking up, the new life, the rebirth, everything is popping off the ground. Energy goes up, metabolism increases. And then we just keep picking up until the summer and we hit the peaks, like we hit the peak, and then it starts going down again, and that's like the fall time. So what I want to mention here is that that is essentially the light pattern. Depending where you live is going to be more pronounced than none, but that is the lighting pattern that we experience throughout the year. That is also our energy pattern in a harmonious manner. I'm all about harmony. I actually don't like to use the word balance as much because now I understand the difference. And when you look at the yin yang, that's a representation. That's what you want to achieve. That's what we want to achieve, being harmonious and being in sync with the environment. Now, what you were describing earlier, which is where most of us live when we are unbalanced, when we are out of harmony, is the down, is cloudy, I hate it. It's just, I'm feeling too low, depressed. It's very low. And then, oh, it's sunny again. Boom. And when you start looking at it, you start realizing that that looks more like the stock market graph.
Yes.
It is in a way, you can't expect anything out of it. The stock market, you can't predict it. It makes abrupt ups and downs. And when you start getting closer to it, you see those little ups and downs that just kind of build up very drastically and then drop down very quickly. And then again. So it's like imagine the Bitcoin graph, right? That is like the example of where we don't want to live. That's when we are victim to the environment because the environment is going to go through that. There's going to be patterns of cloudiness. There's going to be cold. There's going to be wind. There's going to be rain. There's going to be sunny, extremely bright sunny. There's going to be sun with wind. And those, when you are not in control and when you're a victim to the environment, those are those little up and down that start kind of creating a high exponential trend or a very low drop. And that's what I was experiencing back in 2015 till about 2018. I was there. I was going up and down, up and down. I couldn't see it at the moment, but now looking back, that's what I was feeling. I was also feeling very anxious and, I wasn't eating as much sometimes during the spring and the summertime. I was working from, 8 a.m. till, I don't know, 10 p.m. And I was just going, going, going. But what is important here to understand is that just going, that's something that from the outside, it lets the world know that you are going places, like you're doing things. You're not just sitting in the couch like the person in the winter that might be depressed and might be lethargic. That is very easy for society to look down on. But even though you are going, you might not be going in the right direction. Have you ever wondered if all that doing is doing anything good for you? You might be spending your time in the wrong place. You might not be truly chasing your purpose. Why? Because the energy of the season is one of action, is one of energy. You don't know how to control that. You are not in harmony and you are just going up. Well, there is a way down as well. And in that environment, we're not thriving. What is the ideal environment is to know what our purpose is and go through the energy throughout the yearly cycle, know how to slow down a little bit, know how to pick yourself up a little bit. The goal for me is to help people understand how to very naturally and very harmoniously increase their energy a little bit in the winter, recognizing that it's going to be lower than the summer, but also helping them lower themselves down in the summer a little bit, because we don't want to crash, which is essentially what we get to when we don't stop, when we go wild into that energy. So that is basically a little less pronounced yin yang curve, but at the same time, it's not a straight line. There is some fluctuation to it to recover, to think, to evaluate. That's what we do in the winter.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said what you did because it relates so well to the grief process. Grief itself is not linear. It's very up, very down. It's all over the place. And back to what you were saying too about how people go hard at it for, 12, 14-hour days. You can only do that so long before your body says, "Hey, I can't. I'm done. I'm tapped out. My energy is shot." And then you're going to crash really hard. And so I've been a big proponent of, I love that you use the word harmony and not balance. That makes a lot more sense after talking to you today. But it's really about finding that harmony in your process. There's times that I really think urgency culture and grind and hustle culture it just isn't beneficial anymore. It's really not because I applaud everybody for this go, 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 rah, 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 7 days a week mentality, but our bodies are not wired that way. Our mind is not wired that way. And then we get so far out of whack that we crash. And so, like you said about going up and down, and like I said about people that, oh, it's cloudy for 7 days, boom, way down here, and then it's sunny way up here. When you're flicking your body out of whack that hard, it's very hard to feel harmony in yourself. It's very hard to find balance. It's hard to find those things. And then you're always in a place of reacting to everything. You're not responding. And that's the big thing that I've taught people in the grief process is when you react to your trauma, when you react to your grief harshly, you're also going to come swinging down harshly too. You're going to feel everything on those extremes. If you give yourself the space to understand yourself, give yourself grace, understand your flow of energy, like we talked about today with the seasons. Give yourself grace. In the wintertime, you're going to feel a little down. How can you lift yourself up a little bit? In the summertime, don't go bonkers, but keep it right where you're happy. When you level out, instead of swinging this far, you
Mhm.
swing this far, there's a lot more harmony there, and you're actually being productive. You're actually doing something that's meaningful and purpose driven. I read a book about called Ikagi. It's about Japanese living and purpose in life and your world. And the Japanese don't believe in this grind culture that we have in the country. It's just to them that doesn't make sense. What does make sense to them is find what your purpose is, find what makes you passionate. When you go through grief, I say it too, grief happened for you, it didn't happen to you. It's given you this option and ability to transform yourself into version 2.0 of who you are. And that doesn't mean, again, grind 12 hours a day, grind 7 hours a day or eight, leave it there, and then give yourself that harmony balance to rest, recover, relax, like balance that thing out a bit because it's in that place that you will be most productive, but you also be aligned with yourself. And then you can actually feel those. Back to what you said about the grass and holding the bee on your hand. You are so aware and present and conscious to acknowledge that. And that's the space where we create that balance in our life that can move us forward in the right direction of alignment.
There is so much you touch on that I'm not going to be able to remember everything, but I want to touch on a few points. When you're talking about the bees, and that is connection with nature, that has one of the most benefits you can find on any behavior from a neurological perspective. This is all based on science. This is not some, a hippie concept whatsoever. This has been proven by science to have a very good effect in removing stress and cortisol from your body. Now, what I also want to say is that there are seasons where we have to work more than others, and not just in a yearly cycle, but in life. Like when I was 20 some, I was building a few businesses and I was working more, but recognizing when we're getting out of whack too far, like you mentioned, is important. I crashed twice. I had to take 6 months off because I just had to close the business. It was just too stressing. I wasn't sleeping, and it taxes. So when you look at progress and you understand, sure, throughout the summer, I might work more than the winter. It depends on your business. And you go through that flow. It's like entering into the river. You don't want to swim against the current. You want to go with the current. You might have a little bit of room here to direct yourself a little bit. Those are strategic moves that pay over time, but you are not swimming against the current. You're recognizing. That's the first step, is recognize that we're in a river, we're flowing, and we want to become aware of that. That's step number one. Now, step number two is, how can we pick ourselves a little up in the winter when, again, this is all very personal, but you have to generalize. I have ways to get very specific about the person, but from a big perspective, 90% of your listeners are going to identify with being lower in the winter and then being hyper in the summer. That's just universal law, perhaps. The way that we pick ourselves up in the winter and the way that we lower ourselves down a little bit in the summer is through behaviors. Because in the background and an unconscious process, there's chemicals happening. We don't really control as much the way we feel or even what we think. We already said 95% happens on the background. But what we can control is our behavior. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm just saying when you control your behavior, you get a faster result on the way you think and the way you feel rather than the other way around. You can work on your feeling by meditating. Well, that's actually a behavior. Like you are sitting down to shut yourself down, and then the thought process is going to come up. The way you feel is going to come up. But you sitting down and doing that behavior is what leads towards the change. So the concept is, what behaviors will increase our energy a little bit in the winter, and what behaviors will lower our energy a little bit in the summer so we don't crash, so that we can go very hard, but we are not going on the red mark for too long, right? So that's where the method of understanding the most important behaviors come into aligning them with the seasons. So at a very practical level, we're talking about sleeping, we're talking about exercising, we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about nurturing loving relationships with others and the nature itself. We're talking about novelty. And then very importantly, we're introducing what we now call as biohacks. Like there is like this new trend going on that, sure, they're actually beneficial for you, but it truly depends on who you are and which season and for what purpose you're doing them. For example, breathing. Breathing is a great biohack. I mean, it truly is. It's a behavior that if we start breathing slowly and under control, we can calm ourselves down. We can lower our heartbeat. That will calm us. We want to do that in the summer. That is a really good way to lower ourselves down a little bit. Then you can do that after you eat, perhaps. Like you have a lunch, you do a little bit of breathing, and you close your eyes, take a nap for 5-10 minutes. That's gonna basically calm your nervous system during a time of the year that is very influenced by everything that is happening on the environment. There is a lot happening, and we tend to be on a high alert and we tend to be hyper. So that is an example of how we can use breathing in the summer compared to the winter, where we can also do breathing. But for example, A sluggishness in the afternoon is one of those the things that people don't like the most. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just feeling tired after lunch and it's so dark outside. People is not going outside as much. People is doing a lot of things that make them feel tired. It's not There's some chemistry happening, but the lack of behaviors aligning to increase our energy during that time of the year are leading towards that result. But if we use breathing, perhaps after we launch and we eat a lunch that is not too heavy on carbs, that has some veggies perhaps and protein, and it's not too heavy, and then we do a little bit of breathing. But instead of relaxing breathing, we can do a little bit of fast breathing, and that accelerates our heartbeat. That get us a little bit of energy, that pop us up. It can also be some 20 push-ups. It can be, it can really be different behaviors to increase our energy a little bit when we are tend to be on the lower end. So it's understanding what we want to bring to a specific season in a harmonious manner to be a peak performance for the long term. That's how we achieve growth long term. Because if you're going up and going down, it might look like you have been advancing fast, but as you know, compounding behaviors, compounding results, they seem like slower, but when you accumulate and you compounding, you are achieving more. That's the whole goal. It's like how much time are you losing when you're crashing, when you're going into a crisis? Does the crisis have something to do with your environment? Does the crisis have something to do with your behaviors? Are you self-inflicting that on yourself? That's why it's so important to pay attention to that and create a compound effect of behaviors that over the long term are going to get you farther, and you're going to achieve more with less effort. You're actually going to enjoy the journey.
That's really well said, Ruben. I think that, paying more attention to those ups and downs can really, like you said, the first step is awareness of those things, awareness of our patterns we go through. And from that point, focusing on our behaviors we have. I can share with you, I started working out 3 or 4 years ago, and it changed my world. I mean, I can tell you it gave me more energy, it made me feel more calm. I lowered my heartbeat, my resting heartbeat from 95 to 100 all the way down to 72 beats a minute. Um, it's that behavior that you have control over. And that's what I think a lot of people struggle with today. And again, it's really because we live in a environment, impulsive reaction environment that's just it's go to this, jump to that, fast moving all over, that we're not slowing down and paying attention to what's actually going on with ourselves. And when we control those behaviors, just like I have routines every day that I say I'm going to work out and this is just what I'm doing. And I don't care what's going on in the rest of the world. This is just what I'm doing. When I go out into public, for example, I'm very focused on myself. I'm not worried about anything else because I know that I'm in my world and I'm able to focus. And that's the behavior I can control. And I think it's very stoic, by the way, to talk about that because stoicism very much is about focusing on what you can control and letting go of what you can't. It's also very much about taking what works for you and leaving what doesn't. I think there's so much of what you brought up today on this podcast that talks so much about that, learning about you and forgetting all these one size fits all ideologies that are out there and focusing on how can you get more aligned in harmony with the seasonal change and how can you use that to your advantage. I think that's so powerful as people go through grief and loss and trauma because we're going through such huge changes as people and we go through those processes. And I truly believe after talking to you today, I have a much better understanding of seasonal effectiveness disorder and how that impacts us. That I do think in the grief space that I'm in, I think that's very helpful for people to learn how to recognize those patterns, utilize those seasons to their advantage, and then figure out what really works for them. How can they use that to their advantage to really move forward in that process? You brought up something about crashing. We lose a lot of time when we crash, believe it or not. I used to be one of those people that I was in mortgages. I worked, 7 days a week and it was always 8 to 12 hours every day and I would crash. I had no life. I had no pleasure. I had no fun. It was just work, 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 work. And that was so out of whack with harmony, out of whack with balance. There were so many problems that happened because of that. And the minute I took awareness to that situation and I started focusing on what behaviors do I have that I can control, um, my life changed in a minute. I mean, it was fast. And so I just want to say I appreciate you sharing this message today on the podcast. This has been very, very insightful. I think listeners will feel this is very, very helpful for them. It's another tool and another aspect for them as they go along their grief journey to pay attention to the seasons and how those are affecting their journey, affecting where they're at. I think there's so much. I've had a hard time putting this in words, but I think there's so much in nature, so much in the environment, like you said, is in sync with us that we don't recognize and we don't give space and allow, that I really think can be very helpful. I used to go to the mountains all the time when I was really depressed. I'd go up in forest service roads where nobody was at. And when I was up in nature, I felt calm. I felt peace. I felt serene. I felt one with myself. All these cliche things you hear, it's real. It's not cliche. You can be out
Yeah.
in nature, and I'll tell you, your whole chemistry of your body will change in a minute. And you'll feel in this harmony place that you don't find when you're in reality of life in the city. Um, I wanted to ask you as we wrap up the podcast here, if there's people that are, questioning whether or not they're affected by seasons, if there's people that would like to explore that in their own capacity, could you give one or two things of advice on what they should do to start that journey?
Yeah, I love to conclude with that because that's what I wanted to bring to our attention. Number one, philosophy and wisdom found about this way long before science did. This has been around, like you say, Stoicism, Chinese traditional medicine, spiritual practices, which spiritual practices before were science. We just separate that recently with the Western process of thinking. The Western philosophy starts separating from that. So what I want to bring to our attention is that that's where maybe the woo woo like that's very spiritual comes from. But what science is doing now is that it's proving scientifically that this is for real. So epigenetics, above genetics, what is that ranks that? Genes plus environment equal our phenotype, equal who we are, the way that our genes are being activated. And I want to let you know that you don't have to suffer from seasonal affective disorder or the winter blues to be influenced by the environment. The environment influences you no matter what you do. It is one of the bigger portions that dictate who you are today, and they hold the secret to who you want to be. Using the environment for your good is the most bang for your buck that you can get out there. So I invite you to start paying attention and start seeing how you feel season after season, especially when you go through seasonal changes like winter to spring, spring to summer. When you experience that first sensation, oh wow, this is like, that new thing. Start paying attention to the way your behaviors change, your cravings for food, for activity levels, for connection with others. The way society moves is very cyclical, and there are patterns. So once you figure it out, those patterns, now you can use them for your advantage. That's phase one, becoming aware. Phase two, recognizing the patterns. And phase three, using them for your advantage. So my invitation is that you see the power into it and you use it for your own good so that you get in the flow. That's the whole idea. Can you get in the flow? And I can guarantee you that it will take some time, but there's a more rewarding thing to do than being one with our environment. Why? There is a law, the law of oneness. We all come from the same source. We are not that separated. The separation is just an illusion. We vibrate, we have frequencies, and we are 70% water. That is proven by science. Everything that I'm saying is proven by science. So think about that. You're 70% water, and the environment around you is changing. There is a gigantic organism changing in front of us. Just imagine the trees blooming again after the winter. Imagine all the energy happening around you. Don't you think you're going to be affected by that? I let that up to you to figure it out.
So, Ruben, I want to ask you the last question before we wrap up. How can people get a hold of you and how can people connect with you?
I would love to see the comments and we can connect that way. I have a few social medias on Facebook, on Instagram, on we have a school community where we are truly executing this. I have a method. So there is generalization that can go into it to allow you to create your first seasonal routine, and it's repeatable season after season. I'm giving that away for free on my free school community. We're going to provide the link for you on the description, and you can just go there and plug into the ecosystem and create your first seasonal routine. I give you the play by play so that you can create your weekly seasonal routine. Then I also help you improve your day in this specific season. So what I do is that I create the winter project, the spring project, the summer project, and the fall project so that I can give you advice on that specific season you're living. And so you can implement behaviors in that specific season. Remember, you live in a very different place than me. So what we're going to go through first is help you identify the lighting cycles in your specific area. So that will be the place if you want to go and check it out and actually take practical action. That's what I will go. I will go to the school community. And then if you just want to get some content, we're constantly giving advice and letting you up to date what's going on. Like, hey, be paying attention to this. We do that on our Instagram, on our Facebook. So I read the comments myself and I love engaging. And this is what I breathe. This is what I do every day. This is my purpose in life to like we said on the introduction, to elevate the vibration of humanity, to become aware and to use the energy of the seasons for our advantage. So if you want to join the journey, you're more than welcome.
Well, Ruben, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show today. I found this episode very moving and very informative because it's a topic, like we started out saying, that is not very well researched or discussed much in society. It's oftentimes overlooked and misunderstood. And I love that you shed light exactly on what this is today and gave a lot of in-depth experience, of your own personal journey through this and how this has impacted your own life, let alone given some educational value on why we should pay attention to this and make this a part of our own lives. I found it very influential from that standpoint, and I think this could be extremely helpful for people that are going through anything in life, whether you're just on autopilot working a job, or you're going through grief and loss, or you've changed different parts of the world where there's more light in Venezuela than there is here. I just see so many utility for what you're teaching through this seasonal effectiveness disorder. So I just want to really say thank you to that today. I also want to thank our listeners for joining Ruben and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody that you know could benefit from Ruben's story. The Empower Grief Journey is about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want to invite you guys to follow me on Facebook and YouTube at empowergriefjourney.com. I want you guys to also remember that you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.